The auction yard was quiet in the kind of way that made dust seem louder than words. It wasn't that there was nothing for sale. On the contrary, the pens and stalls were full of mule with ribs like a washboard, crates of tools, a wagon with a wheel held on by a single bent nail. But the thing sitting on the cracked dirt under the noonday sun wasn't livestock or equipment. It was a boy, barely 18, shirtless, shoeless, the bones in his shoulders pushing hard against skin that carried more scars than anyone could count at a glance. They weren't the kind of marks you got from a single accident. These were layered years of neglect and fists, a patchwork of survival carved into flesh. People looked because people always look, but no one stepped forward. A merchant with a belly straining his vest muttered to a neighbor, "Feral. That one's wild as a cornered bobcat." A rancher spat into the dirt. "Ain't worth the feed it'd take to keep him." Someone else laughed from the shade of a wagon. "Leave him for the vultures. Save the trouble." The boy didn't flinch, didn't cry. He just sat with his elbows resting on his knees, head down, like he'd been through enough auctions to know they ended the same way. This was just another day to wait out until someone told him to move along. Then came the sound. Not the creak of a cart, not the shuffle of boots from the buyers' benches, but something slower, more deliberate, a pair of boots from the road. A tall man appeared, a long coat, trailing dust. The brim of his sun-worn hat bent and beaten into the shape of 100 untold miles. His horse limped behind him, the saddle leather pale and cracked, reins hanging loose like they'd been mended one too many times. He didn't look at the wagons, didn't glance at the livestock. His eyes found the boy immediately and stayed there. "What's the price?" the man asked, his voice quiet but carrying. The auctioneer blinked. Price? Ain't nobody named him. Ain't nobody claimed him. The man nodded once, walked forward, reached into his coat. Someone chuckled from the crowd. "You buying him?" "No," the man said, kneeling down beside the boy. "I'm taking him." The air shifted, gasps, mutters, a hiss from the back. "That's charity," someone spat. "He'll rob you in your sleep." The man ignored him. He looked the boy in the eye. "Get up." The boy raised his head for the first time. His eyes were dark, his face sharp, the lines in it carved deep from hunger and hard ground. He rose slowly, without a word, and in that movement, bare feet on a hot dirt, thin shadow stretching long, the murmurs quieted. For a moment, even without boots or belonging, he didn't look broken. He looked free. The man handed the auctioneer a few silver coins. "Not payment," he said. "A reminder some things aren't bought. They're rescued." The boy said nothing when the man passed him a frayed hat. Nothing when he offered a tattered blanket and gestured toward the waiting horse. The saddle creaked in protest as they both climbed on, but it held. They turned west. The trail stretched empty before them, the land a sheet of pale dust under a heat-bleached sky. Buzzards drifted overhead, their circles slow and patient. For miles, neither spoke. But a language began to form anyway, in the way the man didn't stare at the boy like he was dangerous or dirty, in the way he made camp in the shade, even if it meant an extra hour's ride, in the way he set out 2 plates before serving himself. By the third sunset, the boy spoke. "Why me?" The man didn't answer right away. When he did, it was only, "You remind me of someone." That night, the fire painted their faces gold. The boy stared into it and finally said, Once I worked at a ranch, cleaned stalls, fed pigs, slept in hay when they let me, got blamed for things I didn't do." He stopped, jaw tight. "They kicked me out with nothing." The man listened, chewing slow. "Men like that think hurting others makes them bigger. I fought back once," the boy admitted. "Good. They broke my ribs." The man didn't look away. "Still good means you haven't given up." At dawn, the boy woke to find a pair of boots beside him, worn but solid. "You'll ride better in those," the man said, cinching the horse's girth. The boy didn't speak, but when he stood, the boots fit well enough to make the morning feel less like a trick. Dry Creek was barely a town. 3 buildings in a row. A sheriff's office with 1 cell, a saloon, and a general store where prices doubled if you didn't have a badge or muscle. The man tied his horse outside the saloon and stepped in. The air smelled of whiskey and dust. A man with a half-closed eye plunked at a piano in the corner. Behind the bar stood Charlie Riggs, an old outlaw with 2 fingers missing and the kind of stare that measured a man in seconds. "Didn't expect you here," Charlie said. "Need supplies," the man replied. Charlie's gaze slid past him to the boy still outside, eyes darting at every shadow. "And the kid, he's with me." Charlie leaned forward. "Then you better know Marshal Ben Crow's on his way, says the boy's a thief. Says he attacked a foreman out near Dust Hollow." The man's face didn't change. Charlie lowered his voice. "This ain't a place for saints." "Good," the man said. "I'm no saint." Outside, the boy had already noticed the 2 riders near the well, black coats, spurs too clean, the kind of smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "You there, boy?" one called. "Got a name?" He said nothing. "I hear you got blood on your hands," the other said, stepping closer. "You come in quiet, or do we scrape you off the street?" The saloon doors banged open. The man stepped out, his coat swinging wide. "He's not going anywhere," he said. The first rider's lip curled. "Marshal says otherwise." "I don't care what the marshal says." The second rider's hand twitched toward his holster. The man's gun cleared leather faster, but his shot struck the dirt in front of them, dust exploding up. The horses danced sideways. "Next time," he said coldly. "It won't be the ground that night." They slept behind the saloon under canvas and stars. "You shouldn't have stepped in," the boy whispered. "They'll come after you now." The man lay back, looking at the sky. Son, they were always coming. They were gone before the first lantern lit in Dry Creek. The air was still, the ground cool from the night, their horses' hooves striking a soft rhythm against the dirt. The man said nothing. The boy followed his lead, the silence thick enough to hear every creak of leather and exhale of breath. By the time the sun broke over the low hills, a thin ribbon of dust trailed behind them. It wasn't theirs. The boy glanced back and stiffened. 4 riders. They were still a ways off, but their horses were fresher and they were riding hard. The man didn't turn his head. "Keep riding," he said. "Don't talk, just ride." They cut through narrow passes where stone outcroppings leaned over the trail, the air there smelling of old rain and rust. The horse's lungs worked hard, foam starting to lace its mouth, but the riders behind were gaining ground. By late afternoon, the shapes of the deputies were clear enough to make out their hats and rifles. The man pulled off the main trail, leading them into a maze of gulches and low ridges. The boy followed, heart hammering, knowing there was no straight road out. Dusk fell as they reached an abandoned mining camp. A scatter of shacks slouched under the weight of years, tools rusting where they'd been dropped decades before. The wind whistled low through broken windows. The man swung down from the saddle, checked his revolver. 6 rounds. The boy looked around the dead camp. There's no way out of here. The man didn't answer. Instead, he handed the boy a knife. Dull, but with enough edge to matter. Last line, he said. The boy stared at it. I've never used it only if you must, the man cut in. But use it. They slipped into the largest shack, the dark swallowing them whole outside. The sound of hooves slowed, then stopped. Boots hit the ground. A voice rang out. Finn Holloway, you're wanted for assault, theft, and evasion. The boy froze. He hadn't heard his full name in years. How do they know? The man's voice was low and steady. That ranch you were kicked from, the foreman you fought. The boy nodded once. That man's last name was Crow. The boy's eyes widened. Marshal Crow. The man's jaw tightened. He's not just enforcing law, he's protecting his own reputation. Bootsteps crunched closer. We can do this clean, one deputy called, or we can burn you out. The man stepped into the doorway. The moon lit the hard lines of his face. I'm the one who helped him escape, he said. Not the boy. Me. The deputies hesitated. One reached for his cuffs. And then came a scream from behind the shack, the brittle snap of timber giving way. One deputy had stumbled into an old mine shaft, the rotted beams collapsing under his weight. Dust boiled up into the night. Shouts filled the camp as the others scrambled to pull him free. The man grabbed the boy's arm. Now they ran between shacks over broken boards, the ground shifting treacherously underfoot. A gunshot cracked the air. The boy felt the heat of it pass near his head. The man stumbled as another bullet grazed his arm, but didn't slow. By the time they reached the edge of the hills, the voices were fading behind them. Hours later, they sat by a narrow creek, both breathing ragged. The man tore a strip from his coat to bind his arm. The boy stared at him. Why did you lie back there? To buy time? They could have arrested you. I've been arrested for less, the boy frowned. You keep doing this for me. Why? The man stirred the embers of their small fire. Because if someone had done this for my brother, maybe he wouldn't have stayed. The boy's head tilted. You had a brother? The man nodded slowly. Still do somewhere. What happened to him? He pulled his coat tighter, like the wind had grown teeth. He was taken in by a man with land and horses, promised him everything, gave him hell instead. Did he run? The man shook his head. He stayed. Thought loyalty would save him. It didn't. The boy stared into the fire, fingers tracing old scars on his arms. They called me Finn once. Before all this, said it was after a river I was found near. I don't remember who named me. The man looked at him for a long moment. Finn? Yeah. He nodded slow and deliberate, as if the name meant something more than he was saying. Later, while Finn slept, the man sat by the dying fire. From his coat, he pulled a worn letter. Edges cracked and ink faded. Only one line was still clear. If you find him, tell him I never blamed him. The signature read, J. Finn Holloway. By morning, the dust on the horizon told of another rider, just one this time. He came slow and sure, wearing a badge, not like it was earned, but like it was owed. Marshal Ben Crow Finn stiffened. That's him. Crow stopped a few feet from their camp. Thought you could outrun me? The man stepped between them. We weren't running. Crow laughed low and bitter. Good, because you're coming with me either way. What's the charge? The man asked. Crow swung down from his horse. He stole, attacked a man in my employee, resisted arrest, nearly killed a deputy. Finn stepped forward, voice sharp. That foreman whipped a 12-year-old stable hand until he couldn't stand. I tried to stop him. You hit him in the jaw with a hammer. Crow snapped. That stable hand was stealing. And you? The man said. What were you doing while children were beaten under your watch? This isn't a debate, Crow growled, drawing his revolver. The man didn't flinch. You want justice? Justice is for courts. No, the man said. Justice is for men who tell the truth. Finn gripped the knife behind his back. I'll run, he whispered. No, the man whispered back. Stand. Crow stepped closer. You really want to die for a kid who doesn't even know his own bloodline? The man's voice was low, measured. He knows enough. Pain, loyalty, fight. That makes him my kin more than any name on paper. Crow smirked. Fine. He raised the revolver. The crack that followed wasn't his shot. A bullet tore into Crow's shoulder from behind. He spun, cursing. Two men stepped from the brush, rifles ready. One was Charlie Riggs, the other, Sheriff Delaney. Drop it, Marshal. Delaney said, You don't own justice out here. Crow froze as Delaney continued. The boy's story checks out. That foreman of yours bought a lot of silence, and you've hidden your own messes too long. Within minutes, Crow was cuffed and cursing, dragged back the way he came. Finn watched him go. I thought he'd win, he murmured. The man gave a small smile. Men like him always think that. The canyon they camped in that night was a split in the earth, wide enough for a river once, but now only carrying wind. The walls caught the echoes of their small fire, sending the crackle and pop of burning wood into the dark. Finn sat cross-legged, staring into the flames. The hat the man had given him pulled low over his eyes. He'd been quiet since Crow was dragged away. Not the kind of quiet that comes from exhaustion, but the kind that comes from thinking too hard about what's left unsaid. You knew me, Finn said finally. His voice was level, but the question underneath it cut clean. The man looked at him for a long moment. I didn't just say you reminded me of someone, Finn. I was someone. Finn's eyes narrowed. So tell me. The man tossed another stick into the fire. Sparks floated upward like scattered stars. I was working a ranch on the edge of Dust Hollow. Just a season's job. One morning, the barn caught fire. No one ever found out how it started. I pulled a boy out, small, soot-covered, scared, stiff, left him with the owner, said I'd be back once I finished the drive I was on. But when I returned a few days later, they told me he was gone, taken by a man claiming to be kin. Finn's fists clenched. That man wasn't my kin. I know. The night deepened. Coyotes calling from somewhere beyond the canyon rim. I searched, the man said. Years. Never found a trail that lasted more than a mile. You stopped looking? No. The trail stopped. Finn swallowed hard. All this time, I thought no one came back for me. I did. Silence settled between them again. Not hostile, but heavy. Finally, Finn asked, What's your name? The man hesitated, not from fear, but from the weight of saying it. Jeremiah Holloway. Finn blinked. Jeremiah's voice dropped. I had a brother named Finn. He looked at the boy. I don't think you're him. I know you are. The fire popped sharply, as if the air itself wanted to interrupt. They didn't ride straight to town the next day. Jeremiah took the long way, winding through low gullies and open scrubland, letting the quiet settle in them. Finn kept glancing at the horizon, mapping landmarks against memories he wasn't sure were real. By the time they reached Dust Hollow, the sun was low, painting the fence lines gold. The place looked almost the same as it had in Finn's memory. Stubborn buildings sun-baked into the dirt, fences leaning like old men, the air carrying the faint smell of hay and dry wood. Without Crow's shadow stretched across it all, the town felt raw, unfinished, like something stripped down to its bones. They left the horse at the edge of town and walked the last stretch. At the ranch, the big house loomed over the yard. A younger woman answered their knock sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied back, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm Jeremiah Holloway," he said. Something in her face tightened recognition, then guarded politeness. "You were here before?" She looked past him to Finn. "And you?" "You're the one they sold off." Finn let his name come out steady, not as a question, but as a claim. "I'm Finn Holloway." The words sat heavy in the air. She stepped back and gestured them inside. Her name was Ruth, the rancher's niece. She didn't pretend the past was clean. "We weren't all for him," she said, voice low. "Some of us knew. There were things, whispers, nights you didn't sleep well because of the sound of boots outside your door." From a crate in the corner, she pulled out old papers, contracts, ledgers, letters. One stood out, folded and refolded so many times it was soft at the creases. Jeremiah's breath caught when he saw the handwriting, the looped J, the careful lines, his own hand from years ago. He read aloud the single line that had survived time and dust. "If you find him, tell him I never blamed him." Finn watched him. "You wrote that?" Jeremiah nodded. "I thought I was writing to a boy I had lost. Didn't know you'd be the one holding it." Finn's shoulders loosened just a fraction. The name was his, and for the first time it felt like the shape of him had been named by someone who saw him, not by someone who used him. "You came back for me," Finn said. The words were fragile as new bone. "I came back for me," Jeremiah said softly, "for the chance I couldn't take the first time." They stayed at the ranch that night in a room that smelled of old wood and sun-baked cotton. In the morning, Ruth set coffee in front of them without asking questions, and Jeremiah asked Finn if he wanted to see the barns. They were smaller than Finn remembered, the fences mended in places with mismatched boards. Standing there, Finn realized something he hadn't before. The land itself had outlasted the men who tried to own it. Jeremiah watched him quietly. "You don't have to stay here," he said, "but if you want to, we can make it ours." Finn thought of the auction yard, of the cracked dirt under his bare feet, of the hat Jeremiah had set on his head without asking for anything in return. He thought of the way Jeremiah had stood between him and Crow without hesitation. "What would we do?" Finn asked. "Build," Jeremiah said simply. The word felt like a promise. They didn't start with grand plans. Grand plans require money, time, and the kind of optimism neither of them trusted yet. They started with small things, fixing the fence nearest the road so the horse wouldn't wander, patching the roof of the smaller barn so rain wouldn't soak the hay, digging a trench so the stream water could be diverted to the trough. The work was steady, honest, and it demanded exactly as much of them as they could give each day, no more, no less. Jeremiah taught Finn how to coil a rope so it wouldn't kink, how to read the sky for weather, how to check a saddle for weak stitching before it failed. Finn learned fast, hands and back aching in a way that came from purpose, not punishment. At night, they sat on the porch. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't need to. Word traveled slow but steady through Dust Hollow and the smaller towns around it. Crow's fall from power had loosened the grip of his old allies. People who'd once been careful about showing sympathy to the wrong side started to test the air. A neighbor repaired a gate without asking for payment. Someone left a basket of bread on the porch. Charlie Riggs rode through one evening with a sack of coffee and a grin. "Figured you'd run out," he said. When Finn offered to pay, Charlie waved him off. "Save your coins. Use them to buy nails." By the second winter, the ranch wasn't just holding, it was growing. They'd taken in a boy of 14 who'd been driven out of town for stealing a loaf of bread. Turned out he was better at mending harness than anyone Jeremiah had met. A year later, they took in 2 brothers whose father had died in a mining collapse. There was no sign on the road, no official declaration. But everyone knew if you had nowhere to go and could work honest, the Holloway place would give you a bed. It wasn't always easy. Nights still came when Finn woke with his chest tight and the taste of smoke in his mouth. There were mornings when he worked until his hands bled just to outrun the old ache of being unwanted. But each time, Jeremiah was there, sometimes with words, sometimes with nothing more than a steady hand on his shoulder. As the years passed, the house filled with signs of life, boots lined up by the door and mismatched pairs, a battered table scarred by the weight of elbows during late-night stories, horses in the corral that answered to whistles, even from boys they hadn't known a year before. One autumn evening, the sun spilling gold over the corral, Finn leaned on the fence beside Jeremiah. "Do you think I should stay?" he asked. Jeremiah didn't hesitate. "I don't know what fate says," he replied, "but I know what I want. I want you here. If you want here too, then we build." Finn looked out at the ranch, the patched barns, the garden that kept stubbornly producing beans, no matter the weather, the laughter of the younger boys chasing the dog across the yard. "Build," he said. And so they did. The ranch became a patchwork of rescued lives. No one was measured by the paper they carried or the weight of their past. The work was hard, the days long, but there was food at the end of them, and no fear of the sound of boots in the night. Years later, Finn stood on the rise above the house and looked down at the land. The place that had once been the shape of his worst days was now the shape of every good one he'd made since. In the yard, Jeremiah whistled for a dog, a plank of wood balanced on his shoulder. His hair had gone silver at the temples, but his hands were as steady as ever. They argued sometimes about the best way to mend a fence or break a colt, but it was the kind of argument that comes from trust, not distance. In the evenings, they told stories to the younger ones, the firelight making everyone's faces seem softer, more certain. And when the wind came with the smell of dust and far-off rain, it sometimes carried memories of the auction yard, the cracked dirt, the boy who had sat alone while men decided his worth. On those nights, Finn would take the old frayed hat from its nail, press it to his face, and remember the moment a man walked out of the road. Dust looked him straight in the eye and offered rescue not as a moment, but as a life built day by day in work and in waiting, in the stubborn, ordinary mercies that make up the story of home.